You don't have to look far to find a spirit of quirky individuality in Vermont. Its lush New England landscapes have the distinction of being both sparsely populated and littered with an abundance of colorful characters. Ben & Jerry's ice cream was founded here in 1978 by childhood friends Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. The Marx Brothers like to spend long, lazy summers at Lake Bomoseen, and Kipling was said to have invented snow golf here when he painted his golf balls red so he could find them during long Vermont winters. Decades later, that same fabled Vermont snow would inspire another sportsman when Jake Burton started his transformational snowboarding brand from a Vermont barn. Soon after, the state would claim yet another significant contribution to American culture with the singular achievements of the band Fish. So it's no surprise, really, that Vermont is where a restless social campaigner and community organizer named Bernard Sanders first wandered into electoral politics in 1971. The fledgling Liberty Union Party needed a candidate for U.S. Senate, and the 30-year-old Sanders figured he'd give it a shot. Sanders had a long and varied activist history that began during his student days at the University of Chicago. He'd worked with CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, protesting segregated classrooms in Chicago public schools. It was during one of those demonstrations that he was arrested, hauled off to jail, and charged with resisting arrest. A few months later, when the case went to trial, he was found guilty and fined $25.
When I was at the University of Chicago, I became involved with people who were active in the civil rights movement, and that was the first time in my life that I had active contact with black people who were active in the peace movement, who were basically talking about socialism. And it was at the University of Chicago that I had an opportunity to do a whole lot of reading in social psychology and sociology. And I would say it was there that my ideas were formed. And I should point out that I did not come from a political family. My parents, I think, voted Democrat, but they were not really terribly political. I had an instinct as a rebel, but the ideas came on top of an already rebellious personality.
3 years after moving to Vermont, Sanders began a string of unsuccessful runs for public office under the Liberty Union ticket, twice for Senate and twice for governor, before finally parting ways in 1977. Though he'd lost his affinity for the Liberty Union Party, his sensibilities still aligned closely with theirs: egalitarian, champions of the young, the poor, the elderly, and staunch defenders of women and workers.
I don't see a way out of my situation. I'm unskilled labor. I can't possibly make any more at any job I could get now.
I mean, the amount of money that you would make working is less than you get on welfare. It would be less
than I get on welfare. And I'd lose my food stamps and my medical card, which doesn't provide for 2 kids too amply.
He considered himself a radical and an independent.
The bulk of those new jobs are close to minimum wage jobs, right? But slave labor jobs, right?
And although he had yet to identify himself as a socialist, his talking points were then, as they remain today, simple and straightforward. The concentration of wealth in this country is lopsided. Those in power are out of touch with ordinary people. Inequality can only be addressed through the power of community.
During the course of the 7 years of PAC's existence, it has waged a number of fights on behalf of low-income people in such areas as housing, employment, welfare, food stamps, police brutality, and so forth and so on. But the real bottom line of all these things is the class issue. That's the one that they're very, very sensitive about. Wealth and power, who controls the world, who owns the world.
After leaving Liberty Union, Sanders pursued his activism and community involvement through other avenues in Burlington.
Good evening. My name is Bernard Sanders. The purpose of this program is twofold. First and primarily, we are going to examine an aspect of Vermont life that is not often seen on television, either commercial or public. We are going to be looking at poverty in Vermont, the economic misery, totally unnecessary in my view, that is grinding down the lives of tens of thousands of Vermonters in every area of our state. We'll be talking to several members of the Abnaki Tribal Council who live in Franklin County, and they'll be telling us about the living conditions there. We'll meet residents of the Franklin Square low-income housing project in Burlington, and some women from central Vermont who are valiantly trying to maintain their human dignity while living on welfare.
Real bad. I got cut from $131 to $48 a month. And with winter coming on with the oil prices, I don't know how we're going to make it.
But the appeal of public office soon bubbled up again, and in 1980, he announced he was running for mayor as an independent. To everyone's surprise, not the least of it his, on March 3, 1981, the city of Burlington elected Bernie Sanders as its mayor by a mere 10 votes.
Today, our guest is Burlington Mayor Bernard Sanders. Sanders is an anomaly anywhere in American politics. Since 1981, he has been the only mayor in the country to call himself a socialist. He ran for senator 3 times and governor once on the Liberty Union ticket. He made his living as a freelance journalist until he was elected mayor here in 1981. Welcome to our show.
Pleasure to be here.
He would go on to win a second term, then a third, and finally a fourth term, reshaping the role of city government along the way in areas such as affordable housing, progressive taxation, and community redevelopment.
But once again, what we are doing is, in my view, of national significance. We are saying that if you articulate the issues, if you make sense to ordinary working people and the elderly and poor people and any people who are willing to look at the issues in a sane and rational manner, that we can bring this community together and go forward. From my point of view, I thank all of you from the bottom of my heart, and I look forward to another exciting 2 years. Thank you.
In the 8 years he served as mayor, Bernie remained true to form, an outspoken critic of corporate excess, a stubborn campaigner for workers' rights.
I don't have to tell you that there's something very wrong in this country today when workers from one end of the country to the other are being asked to take wage concessions.
And a relentless advocate for the elderly, the poor, and the working man.
The idea that people call me Bernie, I think, has to do with the fact that I try and do not believe that a mayor or a governor or a senator or a president is some exalted human being. I don't believe in that stuff. I really don't. I get paid by the people of the city of Burlington. They pay me a very nice salary. They put me in this job. I work for them. I am a worker, like everybody else is a worker. And in a sense, they are my employers. I work for them. I don't see why somebody who works for somebody else should be placed on a higher plane. That's what democracy is about. If they like what I'm doing, they keep me here. If they don't, they remove me. That I am Bernie means that I am a reasonably unpretentious person. I've never had any money in my entire life. Now I have, a few dollars in the bank, but I'm not terribly different than most people are, and I don't want to be treated very differently than other people are.
He never wandered too far afield from the same central issues that had drawn him into community activism from the very beginning.
The first point to understand is if you think that the function of Channel 3 or the Burlington Free Press is to educate you about the world in which you're living, it's not. It really is not. And that's the nature of private media in general. The function of private media is to make money for the people who own the media. It is a business. When you go to McDonald's, you don't go there and say, Jesus, I didn't get the whole story about what's going on in Nicaragua. You got a hamburger. And when you watch television, you also should not be terribly disappointed that you have not learned about what's going on in the world in which you're living. That is not the function of television. In general, not in general, but as is the fact, the mass media in this country is owned by very, very wealthy people. Both David and Abby mentioned that we live in a country where a tiny handful of people own and control our country, and you can be damn sure that when you own and control this country, you own and control the media. Now we do have a free media, it's a free society, and for a mere $6 or $7 billion, anybody in this room could probably buy CBS tomorrow. We might want to pass the hat. After putting the money into my campaign, what we have left over, we might want to buy NBC,
And whether it was his popularity or his policies that led U.S. News and World Report to name him one of the country's best 20 mayors, one thing was for certain. The always slightly rumpled Yankee socialist from Vermont was playing from his own rulebook, constantly redrawing the boundaries of what it meant to be a political figure in America.
And Harriet Tubman believed it on those dark and lonely nights when she risked her life over and over again, leading her brothers and sisters out of bondage on the Underground Railroad. And the workers in our country knew it when they stood up to the bosses and the government and fought to create the unions that would provide them with decent wages and decent working conditions. No, you were not born stupid. Come here. Come here.
That's on the outside. Check the inside. Maybe you'll see something.
That's right. Do you think that, what is your name?
Ernest.
You think you're dumb?
Yep.
Well, I'm the mayor of the city, and I don't think you're dumb, Ernest. And you know where, the only way I think you're dumb? I think when you think you're dumb, because you're not. But if you get into the habit of thinking you're dumb and you can't do anything, then that's what you're going to end up doing, is not doing anything. All right? And I bet you can read. Can you know how to read yet? Can you read yet pretty well? And you can write? And I think when you get into that, you're going to find that reading is interesting. There's a lot of things to be known out there. Okay? All right? And I would hope that you don't give up on yourself.
I think at a certain point, one reaches the conclusion that if one believes in democracy, and that presumably is what our nation is supposed to be about, how can you defend the right that we can go in with the Marines, as we have on many, many occasions, and overthrow any government that we don't like? And then if you think a little bit further about it and you study political science or economics, then you understand that time and time again, these interventions in Latin and Central America have been for the benefit of large corporations, whether it's the United Fruit Company in Guatemala, or the tin companies, or the copper companies in Chile. And you say, gee whiz, should foreign policy be made for the benefit of large corporations who want to exploit the people of Latin and Central America? Is that what America is about? I don't think it is.
In 1988, Bernie's left-leaning political outlook led him to come out in support of Jesse Jackson for president, a fact that didn't sit well with all of his constituents, prompting one very angry Burlington resident to march up to him at the Vermont Democratic Caucus and slap him across the face.
The exciting thing about Jackson's campaign is that this is a guy who comes from the grassroots. We say, well, this guy has never been a senator, he's never been a congressman or a mayor or a governor. That's right, but he has been in the streets. He has put his life on the line, fighting not only for the legal rights, the moral rights of black people, but of all working people. This guy has had the guts to be where the action is. He's been on the picket line with strikers. He's been in demonstration. He started out with nothing, with no money. A black man attempting to get elected in a system which has never in a million years thought to elect a black person. And I think people are impressed with his courage, with his dynamism, with his willingness to articulate issues that are relevant to the disenfranchised, the poor people. 50% of the people in America have given up on the political process. They don't even vote. Who talks about those people? Who talks about them? Mike Dukakis talk about them? Gephardt talk about them? They're non-human beings. They're not part of the political process. And one of the interesting points, people are talking about, if Jackson gets the nomination, can he win? Well, who knows? And I think what the experts are saying is, yeah, the conservative whites are going to desert him, which is perhaps true. But the interesting question, in fact, the most interesting question that modern American politics has ever seen, and will see, is will the 50% of the poor people, the working people, who are now not participating in the political process, who have given up, can Jackson get some of those people to jump in and say, for the first time in my life, I'm poor, I got nothing, I can't pay my phone bill, I can't pay my health care bills, I'm going to vote because Jesse Jackson is standing up for my rights.
Bernie would decide to leave office in 1989 and attempt a second run for Congress, a race in which he would successfully oust incumbent Congressman Peter Smith.
As I understand it, Congressman Smith has just conceded.
He would go on to win re-election 7 times, serving 8 terms, and bringing his characteristic agitator-activist perspective to the chambers of the U.S. House.
Now, my ears may have been playing a trick on me, but I thought I heard the gentleman a moment ago say something, quote unquote, about homos in the military. Was I right in hearing that expression?
Absolutely. Putting homosexuals in the military.
You said something about homos in the military. Was the gentleman referring to the many thousands and thousands of gay people who have put their lives on the line in countless wars defending this country. Was that the group of people that the gentleman was referring to?
There's a lot more deficit reduction that needs to be done. What are some of the programs that you hold near and dear that you'd be willing to give up?
First of all, if in fact my ideas do not prevail, but the President is right and that we reduce our deficit by 50% over the next 5 years, don't kid yourself. That is a major and significant step forward. Now, if your question is, I reject the argument. You see, some people make the argument, they say, well, Bernie, you know, everybody has got to have to suffer. You know, we're all hurting. We're going to have to cut the programs for the elderly and cut the programs for the children and cut the programs for the working people. We're all in this together. But I just gave you some statistics. And what the statistics said is that in a 6-year period during the 1980s, the richest 0.5% increased their share of the wealth by over $1 trillion. Trillion. That is big money. So before this congressman asked working people and poor people and children to take further cutbacks in their standard of living, you know what? I'm going to go after that richest 0.5% who made out like bandits. So I reject the idea that all of us have to suffer. The rich made out like bandits. Working people and poor people saw a decline in their standard of living. What's incumbent upon the President now and the Congress now is to go after those people. Now, after you go after those people, if there's still more to be done, we can talk about it. But we've got a long way to go.
We all know what happens when you dump this money into the deficit. Next year, you'll come back and you'll cut back more on Medicare, you'll cut back more on education, environmental protection, and all of the desperately needed programs in this country. In my view, the real debate has not yet begun. I would like to see this rule defeated. I would like to see some serious debate, and I really would like to see if there are two sides to this assembly here, and have at least one side stand up and say, let's have the wealthy people start paying their fair share of taxes. Thank you.
I find it incomprehensible that at a time when the vast majority of the people in this country are terribly concerned about what's going on in the environment, terribly concerned about the environmental implications of nuclear energy, that the American people do not know what is in their waterways, and that various military installations might be exempted from federal regulatory practices.
On November 7, 2006, Bernie defeated Vermont's richest man, Rich Tarrant, to become a U.S. Senator after 3 previous failed attempts. He had run as an independent and was endorsed by the Vermont Democratic Party. For a man hell-bent on making change happen around him, Bernie Sanders was, decade after decade, campaign after campaign, unyielding in his opinions about what was wrong, and vocal about his ideas on how to make things better.
And what we know beyond the shadow of a doubt is that the debate is over. And that is that the vast majority of the scientists who have studied the issue are quite clear. And what they tell us over and over again is that climate change is real, climate change is caused by human activity, and climate change is already causing devastating problems throughout our country and, in fact, throughout the world. And what the scientists also tell us is that we have a relatively short window of opportunity to bring about the fundamental changes that we need in our global energy system to transform our energy system from fossil fuel to energy efficiency and sustainable energy. We have a limited window of opportunity. And what the scientists are telling us very clearly is if we do not seize that opportunity, if we do not lead the world, working with China, Russia, India, and other countries, in transforming the global energy system, the planet that we leave to our children and our grandchildren will be significantly less habitable than the planet we enjoy. And my nightmare is that 20, 30, 40 years from now, our kids and our grandchildren will look members of the U.S. Senate in the eye, U.S. House in the eye, and they will say, the scientists told you what would happen and you did nothing. Why did you not react? How hard was it to stand up to the fossil fuel industry and transform our energy system away from coal and oil into energy efficiency and wind, solar, geothermal, and other sustainable energies?
In Flatbush, Brooklyn, in the late 1950s, this son of a Polish paint salesman and a housewife who died young signed up for track after being cut from the basketball team. It turned out he was good at running because he simply never quit.
Ordinary people, by the millions, come together